The background of the class that I decided to do the arts integrated lesson on is a 12th grade civics course that I teach. The main reason that I chose this class as the case study on arts integration was because it's a non-leveled course. I wanted to see how an arts integrated lesson would would impact a wide range of students, a wide variety of students. So in this class, there are honors level students. There's students who are on learning plans. So there's a whole wide variety of students in this class, which is primarily the first reason why I decided to use this class for this lesson. The class is a smaller class. It only has 14 students in it, and we also did this during the first week of school. For the lesson that I was doing this on, it is part of a bigger unit on the foundations of the United States government. This particular lesson was just on constitutional principles. So in essence, the lesson was supposed to use art to allow students to show an understanding of one of the 5 basic beliefs that the Constitution was written under. It's an important lesson for the class because it kind of sets the basis for the rest of the year in terms of taking these principles and then applying them to the actual government procedures and the rules for government that are used in this country. I did put in a content and a language objective. So for content, my objective was that at the end, students would be able to identify and apply basic principles of the United States Constitution. For a language objective, I said that students would be able to write a poem that displays an understanding of a constitutional principle. Preparing for this lesson, I looked at a number of different poems to try to use to give examples for students. I wasn't sure exactly the overall level of experience that students had with poetry or how much they've been impacted by it or how many times they've had to use it or if they've had to write it. So I picked 2 examples of poets that I thought would show the ideas of poetry that I thought students would be able to understand. So I picked a couple of Shel Silverstein poems, which is much more conversational. It's written in a much more simplistic form, I would say, in terms of understanding the words. There's a little bit less imagery, so I went with that just to kind of show an understanding of what you can do with a poem. And then I also showed him a Robert Frost poem, which was incorporating a lot more poetic devices such as metaphors and similes and tones. So I tried to give him 2 different types of poems, again, to hopefully reach everybody in the class. As far as other pieces that I needed for the class, I brought a laptop cart that we have at the school so that students would be able to research some things online. And then I also brought poster paper and markers, and that was for students who were allowed to present the poem on any type of medium that they really wanted to. I kind of left them up to them, and a rubric that went over the ways that the poem was going to be scored. Going into the lesson, I was admittedly a little bit nervous. As far as content went, in terms of the subject matter, I didn't have any issue with. I was really confident in that aspect to it in terms of actually the principles and understanding that and, being able to work with students to understand those ideas, I was really, really fine with. I was definitely less confident when it came to the method that we were going to use in terms of using the arts to get these ideas across for assessment. The lack of confidence would primarily come from it wasn't that I didn't understand the importance of art integration or the possibilities with it or the theories behind it. My worry was actually implementing those theories and putting them into practice. A lot of the ideas that came up over the course of this class, I really I saw the potential with, just with it being over the summer and not having any experience really with putting any of these in. I was definitely a little bit less confident in the past when I did any type of art work or any type of arts in the class. I would say that I was probably one of those teachers who fell to the arts as an add-on, as something special, something that was not part of the learning, and it was just an add-on. So I was definitely a little bit worried about putting this into practice. Again, the task that the students were given was to get an understanding of one of the five basic principles and then create a poem that identified and showed an understanding of one or all of the five basic principles of the Constitution, sticking with poetic form. I did give students access to laptops and directed them all to a website that went over the different formats of poems. I didn't say what kind of poem they had to write because I thought that students would be able to um, see the descriptions and see the format of the different types of poems and pick one that really kind of fit what they were comfortable with doing more. So for some students, an acrostic poem worked best. Others, free verse. There was even a couple kids who experimented with writing a number of different types of poems. We stayed away from the short ones with haikus and limericks, even though I did have a couple of kids who just playing around wrote a few of those. But each student could pick whichever type of poem that they wanted to, as long as they stuck with the format. The students were given a rubric that basically looked at three different parts. One was the quality of the poetry, where I was looking to make sure that they incorporated some poetic devices, meaning alliteration, consonants, metaphors, similes, tone. Another part of the rubric on government principles, meaning that they actually showed an understanding of a government principle and could apply it to an actual hypothetical or real world situation. And then the final part was, I think with poetry, a lot of the times it really matters that it's presented. So I had all students were required to read the poem that they created in front of the class. So each one of those aspects to this, I did weight them all equally in the hopes that they would understand that it wasn't good enough to just do one aspect of it. So they had to really work to integrate the poem and the principles all together. The first example that I have is it's an acrostic poem that one of my students did. Overall, I think that she did get the idea of what popular sovereignty was, and she got the idea of what an acrostic poem is. She shows an understanding of the ideas. I would say overall it was a fairly well done poem. I think that she probably could have brought in a little bit more in terms of poetic devices like similes and metaphors. But I think that she does try when she's talking about, restless citizens and things of that nature. So I do think that she made the effort to go that way, and I do think she shows a pretty general understanding of the principle. So overall, for a first kind of attempt at this, I do think that it was a good effort. The second poem, again, it was a student who I think kind of fell a little bit short in terms of definitely showing an understanding of the principle that she was going with. She gave a more general idea of what the Constitution was about, and then tying in some of the verbiage from the Constitution. I'm a little bit, concerned with the poetic aspect to it, but this was a student who, when she did hers, she said, if you just read my poem, it's not going to come across the way that I want it to. She said it has to be read a certain way, and then she got up and she read it in a very stern voice, which got the ideas across that, this was a big important issue and something to be stern and be concerned about. So I thought she actually helped out with the idea that, poetry is really a performance piece as well. So I did like that. The final example I do have is a student who was much, much more straightforward with everything that he looked at. He kind of went back and forth, I think, at times between trying to um, rhyme and have a, kind of customary poem that has rhyming in it to bringing in real world events. So, again, it was another example where I think that the student um, really tried to get the ideas across, which, again, for the first time, I was not overly um, upset at the effort. Overall, I thought the lesson was somewhat successful. Being early in the year, I actually do think that with a little bit more time, that this is something that could really take off. I did see all the advantages to this. Again, I think students were much, much more engaged during this activity than they normally would be. So I thought that was really an important aspect to it. Um, Again, coming in, being really early in the year, and doing this, I probably in the future would try to, as they say in the course, work with other content area teachers to try to get these really in-depth poetry ideas in there a little bit more. So in the future, I definitely see this being extremely worthwhile and the benefits to it. I also asked students their take on the lesson. I asked them to do some reflection. And I asked them a few questions, but the two that I thought were the most important were if students thought this was um, an effective way to teach a lesson. And hands down, I would say that the numbers were right around 80% who said that this was a positive way to teach and that they got something out of the lesson. So I think that in itself is good news. And then I asked them one other question just to see about the level of arts integration. I asked them which they thought was more important in the long run. Was it the poem or was it the content? And every single student said to me that they didn't know if they were supposed to make their poem really good or they were supposed to get the idea of the content across. And I thought this was really important in terms of the idea of the class that the arts shouldn't be the focus and the content shouldn't be the focus, that they should work together um, to teach the ideas that you're trying to get across in terms of content. And I think overall, that was an idea that the students kind of understood. And going forward, I think that doing lessons like this, students will really latch on to that idea that the two of them kind of work in concert together. Thank you.